The dumpster sat behind the Henderson Farm Market on the north side of the building, where the morning shadow kept the metal cold long after sunrise. It was 5 o'clock on a Tuesday in November, the kind of November cold that doesn't ask permission, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. Maren Holloway was 68 years old, a widow, a retired emergency room nurse, and she was reaching her bare hand into a trash bin behind a grocery store before the sun came up. She wasn't ashamed. She had stopped being ashamed of practical things a long time ago. What she found that morning would make the whole town of Millbrook laugh at her by sundown. 247 silky chicken eggs. Cracked, discarded, thrown away because they couldn't be sold. She lifted one in her palm. It was cold. She lifted another. Cold. Then the third one. And the third one was warm. Not the warmth of a fresh egg from a hen. The warmth of something that was still trying. Something that hadn't given up yet, even after the world had thrown it in the trash. Maren stood very still in the dock light. Her breath hung in the air. And in that moment, holding one warm egg in the palm of a hand that had cared for thousands of strangers, she made a decision that would bring her estranged daughter home, expose a secret buried for 20 years, and remind an entire town what it means to still be here. This is her story. The dumpster sat behind the Henderson Farm Market on the north side of the building, where the morning shadow kept the metal cold, where the dock light burned yellow all night and made everything look slightly sick in the dark. It was 5 o'clock on a Tuesday in November, November 13th, 2018. The kind of November cold in Iowa that doesn't ask permission. That settles into bones. That stays. Maren Holloway stood in the empty parking lot of Henderson Farm Market in Millbrook, Iowa. 68 years old, widow of 5 years, retired emergency room nurse with 38 years on her feet. She wasn't supposed to be there. The market didn't open until 7. The staff didn't arrive until 6:30. And the back of the building, the back of any building, was a place most people in Millbrook didn't think about. Maren thought about it, because she had learned a long time ago that the back of a place told you more than the front. Because what people threw away was a more honest inventory of what they had than anything on the shelves inside. Because once, in a snowstorm in February 1986, she had pulled a wool coat from the dumpster behind the Methodist Church thrift store and worn it for 9 winters and buried her mother in it. She was looking for produce crates that morning. Wooden ones, wide and shallow. The kind she used to start seedlings in March. The kind nobody made anymore. The kind that only showed up at the back of the Henderson Farm Market after a delivery of stone fruit from California or apples from Michigan. The dumpster had its lid propped open, which meant a delivery had come in recently, which meant staff had been climbing in and out and didn't bother closing it. Maren went around to the side, stepped up on the metal rail, looked in, and stopped breathing. Not crates, eggs, stacked in wooden flats, 6, 7 flats, maybe more underneath. Pale blue cream silky eggs, the small kind, the expensive kind, the kind that Henderson Farm Market carried for the boutique crowd from Des Moines who drove out on weekends and bought them at $8 a half dozen. Hundreds of them. Cracked, every single one. She climbed in. Her knees weren't what they used to be. The metal edge of the dumpster pressed against her hip through her field jacket. The cold of the rim went straight through her flannel-lined work pants. She didn't notice. Because she was counting. 1 flat, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 247 eggs. She did the math the way she had done it in the trauma bay for 38 years. Fast, without panic, without commentary. She lifted one in her palm. Cold. She lifted another. Cold, a third, and the third one was warm. Not warm like a fresh egg under a hen. Not the living warmth of something carrying its own body heat. The warmth of something that was still trying. Something internal. Something that hadn't committed to stillness yet. She had felt this before. In other contexts. In other hands. On other shifts. The difference between a body that had stopped and a body that was still deciding. She held the egg between both palms. Stood very still in the dock light. Her breath hung in the air in front of her. And the egg was warm. And nobody in this town was going to believe her. Maren Holloway came back to the Holloway property outside Millbrook in October 2015. 3 years before that November morning, 18 months after her husband Halden died in his sleep on a Tuesday in March 2013. She had been a registered nurse at St. Bernard's Hospital in Des Moines since 1977, the emergency department. 38 years of nights and weekends and holidays. 38 years of car accidents on Interstate 80 and farm accidents from the surrounding counties, and the slow, steady tide of strokes and heart attacks and overdoses and gunshot wounds and children with high fevers brought in at 3 in the morning by parents who didn't know what else to do. She had been good at her job. She had been very good at her job. She had a reputation among the residents at St. Bernard's. The young doctors. They knew. If Maren said, "Check it again," you checked it again. If Maren said, "This one isn't done yet," you didn't write the time of death. If Maren put her hand on her chest and said, "Wait," you waited. She had a phrase. Among the staff. Everyone knew it. Check twice before you conclude. She said it to interns. She said it to chaplains. She said it once, famously, in 1998, to a senior attending who was about to call a 42-year-old woman from a highway accident. The attending had been irritated. The pulse was thready. The pupils were fixed. He said, "Maren, we're done here." And Maren had said, "Try again, one more time." The woman had lived for 17 more years. But Maren didn't remember that case specifically. She had thousands of cases. They blurred. They overlapped. She remembered fragments, not faces. She retired at the end of 2015, 2.5 years after Halden's funeral. She had stayed in the apartment in Des Moines for a while, because moving felt like more than she could manage, because the bed still smelled like him for the first 6 months, because she had a routine, and the routine was the only thing holding her together. But the routine wasn't holding her together. It was holding the shape of her together while the inside of her hollowed out. She knew this. She had seen it in widows in the ER for decades. She knew what she was watching herself become. So she sold the apartment and moved back to the farm, 40 acres in the hill country east of Millbrook. The Holloway place, her mother's originally. Then hers when her mother passed in 2008. A farmhouse that needed work. A barn that needed less work. A pond fed by a spring that her grandfather had described as reliable, and which had proven its reliability through dry summers and wet ones since Maren came home. She kept 18 laying hens, sold eggs at the Henderson Farm Market on Saturdays, drove a 1982 Ford F-150 that had been her father's, went to the First Methodist Church of Millbrook every Sunday morning, sang in the choir. She was known in Millbrook as the Holloway woman who came back, which was accurate. Some people added widow. Some people added the particular quality of silence that attached to people who had spent their working lives close to other people's worst days. A quality Millbrook recognized and didn't know what to do with. Halden Holloway had been a high school agriculture teacher for 31 years. He had married Maren in 1979 when they were both 29. They had one daughter, Sloane, born in 1983. A bright, sharp-eyed girl who skipped second grade and won the state spelling bee in 5th grade, and got into Northwestern on academic scholarship, and went on to Stanford Law, and never came back to Iowa for more than a long weekend at Christmas. Sloane was 35 years old now, a partner track associate at a corporate law firm in Denver, Colorado. Or she had been. Maren didn't know what she was currently. Because Maren and Sloane had not had a real conversation in 3 years. 3 years? 2 months, and 17 days. There had been one phone call in April 2015. Sloane had called. Maren had been in the trauma bay. The phone in her locker had rung 6 times in 6 hours. Maren had not answered. By the time she called back, something had already happened. Something Sloane could not say into a voicemail. Maren had sent flowers. The flowers had been her answer. And the silence after the flowers had been her second answer. Neither of them had spoken since. The funeral 3 years and 7 months earlier had been the last time they had stood in the same room. March 2013. In the basement of the First Methodist Church. After the casseroles. After the relatives. After the hymns. Sloane had come up to Maren, 30 years old at the time, beautiful in her grief, hollow-eyed, And she had said, "You spend your life taking care of strangers. And you weren't there when I needed you." Maren hadn't answered. She had stood in the church basement, holding a foam plate of someone's tuna casserole. And she had not been able to find a single word that would be true. Because Sloane was right. And because Sloane wasn't right. And because both of those things were true at the same time. And Maren had spent enough years at bedsides to know that when both things are true, the room goes very quiet, and nobody knows what to say. Sloane had flown back to Denver that evening. Maren had not called. Sloane had not called. 3 years, 2 months, 17 days? Maren prayed for her every night. By name, out loud, in the dark of the farmhouse bedroom that had been her parents' bedroom. With her hand on the quilt her grandmother had stitched in 1962. Lord, please soften my daughter's heart toward me. Lord, please let me understand what I did wrong. Lord, please don't let her go through whatever she's going through alone. Amen. That was every night. For 3 years, 2 months, 17 days. And then on the morning of November 13th, 2018, Maren found 247 cracked silky eggs in a dumpster. And one of them was warm. She climbed out of the dumpster slowly. Because her knees. She lowered the warm egg into the deep pocket of her field jacket, wrapped in the wool scarf she kept in her sleeve. She climbed back up. She started checking. It took her 40 minutes. The morning got slowly lighter in the slow, uninterested way of November mornings in Iowa. The dock light stayed on. She worked by it and by the small flashlight she kept on her keyring. The same flashlight she used to take in her pocket for night shifts at St. Bernard's. She had a method. Hold the egg, both hands, eyes closed, feel for warmth. Feel for the not quite stillness she had felt in the third egg. The quality of something not yet committed. Most were cold. Cold in the specific way of eggs that had been cold long enough that cold was what they were now. The warmth gone past the point of recovery. She set those back. 71 eggs were not cold in that way. 71. Out of 247. She didn't know what she was going to do with 71 cracked silky eggs. She knew only that she wasn't going to leave them. She climbed down, went to the truck, pulled the wooden produce flat from the back, the same kind she had originally come looking for, layered the bottom with straw from the burlap sack she kept under the driver's seat for the chickens, lifted each egg in, pointed end down, the way her grandmother had taught her in 1958. 71 eggs, settled in straw, in a wooden flat, on the passenger seat of a 1982 Ford F-150, in the parking lot of Henderson Farm Market, at 6:15 in the morning, in Millbrook, Iowa. She reached over, pulled the passenger seatbelt across the flat, buckled it, through the side slats, across the top edge. She drove home at 45 miles an hour, which was 10 under the limit, because the road had curves in the dark. And the eggs needed a smooth ride. She did not see the man watching her from the cab of the delivery truck idling on the far side of the lot. His name was Tobias Marsh. He delivered fence posts and hardware to the market 3 days a week. He was 46. He had nothing against Maren Holloway personally. He liked her. But he had been sitting in his idling truck for 10 minutes, drinking gas station coffee, and he had watched her climb into a dumpster and come out with a wooden flat and buckle the flat in like a passenger. And he was going to tell people, because that was the kind of thing you told people. Daisy's Diner opened at 6. By 7 on most mornings, the conversation had established itself in the way of a conversation that has a default subject and returns to it naturally. The default subject, most mornings, was the weather, the price of corn, whose son had gotten a scholarship, whose daughter had gotten divorced. On the morning of November 13th, 2018, the default subject was Maren Holloway. Tobias Marsh sat at the counter with his coffee, talking to Ro Brennan, who ran the Henderson Farm Market, and who had come over for breakfast before going in to open up. Tobias said. She buckled them in, Ro said. Buckled what in? Tobias said. The eggs, the cracked eggs, from the dumpster behind your store. She loaded them into a wooden flat and seatbelted them like a passenger. Ro said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Maren did. Tobias said, Maren did. Ro was 61, bald, heavy-set, a man who had worked for the Henderson family for 24 years and become market manager 9 years ago. He was not a gossip. He didn't like gossip. He thought gossip was what people did when they ran out of work. But he poured cream into his coffee. He looked at his coffee. He said, "What is she going to do with them?" Tobias said. "I have no idea." By 8 o'clock, the story had moved. Through the diner. Through the feed store across the street. Through the post office. Through the Casey's gas station on the corner. By 10 o'clock, the count had grown. From 71 to 150 to 300. Because people who retell stories add and round. Because 300 is a better number than 71. Because nobody who was retelling it had been there. By noon, Maren Holloway was either trying to hatch the eggs, sell the eggs, eat the eggs, or use them in some kind of homemade fertilizer. By 2 in the afternoon, the phrase that had attached to her was, "She's losing it." By 3 in the afternoon, someone had used the phrase, "She's not been right since Halden died." By 4, someone said, "Somebody should call her daughter." The somebody who said that was Cormac Yates. Cormac was 64, owner of Yates Poultry, 300 acres south of town, 40,000 bird commercial chicken operation, the biggest poultry producer in the county, a man who had grown up 2 miles from Maren, who had gone to Millbrook High School with her in the class of 1968, who had asked her to marry him in the summer of 1972. She had said no. She had said yes to Halden Holloway 11 months later, and Cormac Yates had married a woman named Adele Renner in 1975. Adele had been a kindergarten teacher, sharp and funny and warm, and the kind of woman who remembered every child she ever taught. They had been married 43 years. In 2017, Adele had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at the age of 67 by the fall of 2018. She had been moved to Cedar Manor Memory Care in Cedar Rapids, where the rate was $9,400 a month. Cormac was bleeding money. Cormac was also bleeding something else. But he hadn't said the word for it, not even to himself. He sat at the corner booth at Daisy's Diner on the afternoon of November 13th, listening to the story make its rounds. And he thought about Maren and Halden, and the way Maren had looked at Halden's funeral, like a woman holding herself together with both hands. He thought about Adele, who didn't know him most days now. He thought about the 40 acres of Holloway land that abutted the southern edge of his property. He thought about the $800,000 he could put down on a long-term contract at Cedar Manor if he could just consolidate his holdings. He thought about Sloane Holloway, whose number he had because Sloane had been Halden's daughter, and Halden had been Cormac's friend in high school. And 5 years ago when Halden died, Sloane had given Cormac her business card at the reception. Sloane Holloway, attorney at law, Denver, Colorado. Cormac took out his phone. He scrolled to the contacts. He stopped. He did not call, not yet, but he saved the number to the top of his recent list. Maren did not know about the diner, or the feed store, or the gas station, or the conversations. She was at the barn, setting up the brooder. The brooder was a low pen of salvaged 2x4s and hardware cloth she had built in 2017 for her first batch of chicks, 4 feet by 4 feet. Sat on a wooden pallet. She had used it twice. It was in the corner of the barn under the east window. She dragged it out, wiped it down, laid fresh straw, 2 inches, the right amount, enough to cushion, not enough to compact. She hung the heat lamp from the ceiling beam, the infrared model, the one without the red light. The pamphlet from the 4-H manual in 2017 had said the red light caused pecking aggression. She had paid attention. She set the thermometer at egg level, adjusted the lamp angle, 45 degrees from vertical, so the heat fell across the brooder in a gradient, so the eggs could orient, so the embryos would have warmer side and cooler side, the way a mother bird made it. She put 2 shallow pans of water on the floor of the brooder, for humidity. The pamphlet said the silky eggs needed 60 to 65% humidity for the first 25 days. She lifted the eggs in one at a time, from the wooden flat, into the brooder, pointed end down, tilted slightly, marked in pencil. A small dot on one side, so she could track the turning. 71 eggs, settled in straw under the heat lamp. She wrote in her notebook. The same notebook she had used for the chickens, a spiral bound from the Casey's gas station. 99 cents. She wrote, November 13th, 2018. 56 eggs retained from 71 retrieved. 15 showed compromise on second inspection. Removed, 56 in brooder. Temperature 99.5 at egg level. Humidity 62%. Turn schedule 6 a.m., 12 p.m., 6 p.m. Do not miss noon turn. She underlined the last line. Twice. She set the alarm on her phone, labeled it, turn. She went inside. She made a pot of coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She prayed, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I couldn't leave them. Amen. She drove to the Millbrook Public Library the next morning. The library was small, one room, staffed by a woman named Wilma Pickett, who was 71, widowed in 2014, who had been the librarian in Millbrook since 1980. Wilma knew every regular by name. She knew what they read. She knew what their children read. She knew which titles had been requested 3 times last year and never showed up. She looked up when Maren came in. She said, Maren? Maren said. Wilma, Wilma said. You're early, Maren said. I need books on hatching silky eggs. Wilma's hands paused over the keyboard. She said, Maren, Maren said. I know, Wilma said. The diner, Maren said. I know. Wilma got up from her chair. She walked around the desk. She stood in front of Maren in a plaid wool cardigan, hands on her hips. She said, Are you all right? Maren said. Yes, Wilma said. Are you actually all right? Or are you all right in the way that women our age say, all right when we don't want to talk about it? Maren almost smiled. She said, The second one. Wilma nodded. She said, Come on, let's find your books. She found 3. A 1989 Extension Service pamphlet on small flock poultry, a 1996 University Press Guide to Heritage Breeds, a spiral-bound 4-H manual from 2009 with a chapter specifically on silkies. Maren took them to the reading table by the window. She read for 2 hours. She took notes. Silky eggs, 21 days incubation. Same as standard chicken eggs. Temperature 99.5 Fahrenheit at egg level. Humidity 60 to 65% days 1 through 18. 70 to 75% during lockdown days 19 through 21. Turn 3 times daily minimum. Odd number of turns. Candle at day 7 and day 14 for development confirmation. She read the section on cracked eggs 3 times. The 1989 pamphlet said cracked eggs should not be incubated. The 1996 guide said hairline cracks could sometimes be sealed with melted beeswax or paraffin, and the egg incubated with reduced expectations. The 4-H manual said the membrane was the actual barrier, not the shell. And if the membrane was intact beneath a surface crack, the egg could often complete incubation, particularly if the crack was sealed within 24 hours of cooling. Maren wrote, Seal cracks, beeswax, within 24 hours. Membrane integrity is the determining factor, not shell appearance. She underlined it. She returned the books, Wilma said. Are you really trying to hatch them? Maren said, I'm checking, before I conclude. Wilma looked at her. She said, My mother used to say that. Maren said, About what? Wilma said, About everything. She raised 8 children through the Depression. Nothing got thrown out until she had checked it. She paused. She said, Good luck, Maren said. Thank you. She went to the hardware store, bought a small jar of beeswax, the kind used for sealing letters and woodworking. She went home. She spent the evening at the kitchen table, with a toothpick and a candle to melt the wax, sealing the surface cracks on the eggs that needed it. 23 eggs got wax. She marked each one with a pencil X. She put them back in the brooder. She turned the eggs at 6 p.m. She did not miss the noon turn. She did not miss the morning turn. She did not miss anything. The phone rang on Saturday afternoon, November 17th, 4 days after the dumpster. Maren was in the barn. She came in through the mudroom, pulled off her boots, picked up on the 4th ring. She said, Hello. The voice on the other end said, Mom. Maren stopped breathing. It had been 3 years, 2 months, 21 days. She did not say her daughter's name. She did not say anything. Because if she opened her mouth, she didn't know what would come out, Sloane said. I heard, Maren said. Heard what? Sloane said. I heard you've been climbing into dumpsters. Maren held the phone. She heard her own heartbeat in her ears. She said, Who told you? Sloane said. Does it matter? Maren said. Yes, Sloane said. A man named Cormac Yates called me. He said you weren't well. Maren closed her eyes. She said, I am well, Sloane said. You're collecting cracked eggs from the trash, Maren said. I'm not collecting them. I'm hatching them. There was a silence on the line. Sloane said, Mom, Maren said. I'm not losing my mind. I checked the eggs. They were viable. I have 56 of them in a brooder. I am following the procedures, Sloane said. Mom, please, Maren said. Please what? Sloane said. Please don't do this. Please don't make me come out there. Maren said. I am not making you do anything, Sloane said. The whole town is talking about you. Maren said. The whole town has always talked about everyone. It is what towns do, Sloane said. I'm flying out tomorrow. Maren said. You don't have to, Sloane said. I do. There was a pause. Sloane said. Mom. Why? Maren said. Why what? Sloane said. Why eggs? Out of all things, why eggs? Maren held the phone. She thought about how to answer. She thought about the warmth in her palm. In the dock light. At 5:15 in the morning. The third egg, she said, because one of them was warm. Sloane was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'll text you my flight. She hung up. Maren stood in the mudroom holding the phone. She did not cry. She had not cried in 5 years. Not at the funeral. Not the night after. Not any night since. The crying had become something that lived in her, but did not come out. The way some animals went still when they sensed danger. She had gone still in 2013, and she had not come back yet. But she stood in the mudroom holding the phone, and something in her chest, some long still thing, moved. Sloane Holloway landed in Des Moines on Sunday afternoon, November 18th, rented a car at the airport, drove 93 miles northeast to Millbrook in a sleet that had started over Marshalltown and had not stopped. She was 35 years old. She had not slept properly in 2 months. She had been laid off from Whitfield Cross LLP on September 4th, in a restructuring, after 8 years. She had been told she was excellent. She had been told the firm was just downsizing the Denver office. She had been told she would have an outstanding recommendation. She had been escorted out by security at 4 p.m. with a banker's box. Her husband Pierce, whom she had married in 2014, had moved out on October 11th. He said he wanted space. He said he needed to find himself. He had moved in with a woman named Brielle 2 weeks later. Brielle was 26, a yoga instructor. Pierce had described her to Sloane in a text as the first person who had ever truly seen him. Sloane had not told her mother any of this. Sloane had not told anyone any of this. She had been living off her savings and pretending. She had been wearing her work clothes around the empty Denver loft and applying for jobs at every firm in the Mountain West and being politely declined by all of them. Because the legal market in 2018 was tight. Because she was 35 with a corporate background. Because the references she had didn't matter as much as the references she didn't. She had been losing weight she could not afford to lose. She had been drinking too much wine. She had been waking up at 4 in the morning with her heart racing. And then Cormac Yates had called. A name from her father's high school. A voice she had not heard since the funeral. He had said, Sloane, I'm sorry to be the one, but your mother's been seen doing some unusual things. She climbed into the dumpster behind the farm market. She seems confused. Sloane had hung up the phone. She had sat in her kitchen, looking at the chrome refrigerator, for 40 minutes, without moving. And then she had booked a flight. She told herself she was going to fix it, because she was good at fixing things. Because she had fixed things her entire life. Because if her mother was losing her mind, then somebody had to step in. And there was no one else. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that she had nowhere else to go. The Holloway farmhouse came up on the right at 4:40 in the afternoon. November light, already low, already gray. She turned into the driveway, crunched over the gravel. The truck was in the yard. Her father's old Ford, 42 years old now, still running. The kitchen window glowed yellow. Sloane sat in the rental car for a moment, looked at the house she had grown up in, the porch where her father had taught her to whittle, the window of her childhood bedroom on the second floor, the barn beyond the house where she had spent every summer of her life until she left for Northwestern. She thought, I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to walk in there. I have not been a good daughter. I am not a good lawyer anymore. I am not a good wife. I do not know who I am. She got out of the car. She walked up the porch steps. The door opened before she knocked. Maren stood in the doorway. 68. Gray hair pinned back. Wearing the same flannel shirt she had been wearing in every memory Sloane had of her in this house. They looked at each other. 3 years, 2 months, 22 days. Maren said, Sloane. Sloane said, Mom. Neither of them moved. Maren said, Come in, it's cold. Sloane stepped past her into the kitchen. The same kitchen. The same wallpaper. The same yellow Formica table from 1971. Maren closed the door. She said, There's coffee, Sloane said. I don't want coffee. She set down her overnight bag, took off her coat, stood in her mother's kitchen in a cashmere sweater and dark jeans that cost more than her mother's monthly grocery bill. She said, Where are they? Maren said. Where are what? Sloane said. The eggs, Maren said. In the barn. Sloane said, Show me. Maren got her coat. They walked out across the yard in the sleet, past the chicken coop. Maren's 18 hens were settled inside for the evening. The dog Halden had bought in 2009 had died in 2016. Maren had not gotten another. She had thought about it, but she hadn't. The barn smelled the same as Sloane remembered. Hay and wood and the faint, clean smell of the chickens. Maren had kept it well. In the corner, under the east window, was the brooder. A low pen of 2x4s and hardware cloth, a heat lamp glowing orange, 2 shallow pans of water, and in the straw, 56 pale blue cream silky eggs, tilted point down, each one marked with a small pencil dot. Sloane stood in front of the brooder. She did not speak for a long time. Maren stood beside her. Sloane said, Mom. Maren said, Yes. Sloane said, Mom. These are cracked eggs from a dumpster. Maren said, Yes. Sloane said, You think they're going to hatch? Maren said, I think some of them might. Sloane said, The other eggs in there, are they going to rot? Are they going to make the brooder sick? Maren said, I sealed the cracks on the ones that needed it. The membrane was intact. The egg can complete incubation if the membrane is intact, Sloane said. You learned that from a pamphlet, Maren said. I learned that from 3 pamphlets and a 4-H manual. Sloane was quiet. She looked at the brooder. She said, Mom, I need you to listen to me. Maren said, All right, Sloane said. I think you should see Dr. Friesen. I think we should do a cognitive assessment. I think we should make sure that that what you're doing is, that it is. She trailed off. Because she didn't know how to finish, Maren said. That it is what? Sloane said. That it is rational. Maren turned, looked at her daughter. Really looked. For the first time since Sloane had walked in. And what she saw was not a Denver lawyer. Was not the polished 35-year-old in the cashmere sweater. Was not the daughter who had said you weren't there when I needed you in a church basement 5 years ago. What she saw was a woman who was thin and tired, and whose hands were shaking very slightly, and whose makeup had been carefully applied at 4 in the morning to cover a face that had not slept, and whose eyes were the eyes of someone who had been holding something heavy for too long, and was about to drop it. Maren had seen those eyes 1,000 times in the ER waiting room. She said, Sloane. Sloane said, What? Maren said, Are you eating? Sloane stared at her. She said, What kind of question is that? Maren said. The kind of question I'm asking, Sloane said. Mom. Don't change the subject, Maren said. I am not changing the subject. I am asking the subject, Sloane said. I came here to talk about you, Maren said. We will, after dinner. Will you eat with me? I made stew. Sloane stood very still in the barn, for a long moment. Then she said, I have a room at the Pine Ridge Inn, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. I'll come back tomorrow, Maren said. All right. Sloane walked out of the barn, across the yard, got in her rental car, drove down the gravel driveway and back into town. Maren stood in the barn. She turned off the overhead light. She looked at the brooder in the orange glow of the heat lamp. 56 eggs in straw. She put her hand against the hardware cloth. She said, out loud, to no one, to Halden, to God, to the eggs themselves, she said, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just checking, that's all. She closed the barn door, walked back to the house, took the stew off the stove, sat down at the yellow formica table, ate alone. The way she had eaten alone for 5 years, 11 months, and 4 days. She turned the eggs at 6 p.m. She did not miss the turn. She set the alarm for the next morning. She went upstairs, knelt by the bed, put her hand on her grandmother's quilt. She said, Lord, my daughter is here. I do not know why she has come. I do not know what is broken in her. I can see that something is broken in her. Please, if anything is still trying in her, help me find it. Amen. She got into bed. She turned off the lamp. Outside the window, the sleet kept coming down, and in the barn, under the orange light, 56 cracked silky eggs sat in straw, pointed end down, each one marked, each one turned, each one still trying, and nobody in the town of Millbrook. Not Cormac Yates, not Tobias Marsh, not Wilma Pickett, not Roe Brennan, not even Sloane Holloway in her room at the Pine Ridge Inn with the curtains drawn. Nobody knew that what was happening on the Holloway farm was not a story about chickens. It was a story about a woman who had spent her entire adult life checking twice before she concluded. And the only thing left in her life she had not yet checked was her daughter. Sloane did not come back the next morning. She did not come back at noon. She did not come back at 3. Maren turned the eggs at 6 a.m. She turned them at 12. She turned them at 6 p.m. She did not look at her phone. She did not call her daughter. She did not drive into town to see if the rental car was still at the Pine Ridge Inn, because she had spent 38 years in emergency rooms. And she knew, when a person comes in shaking, with makeup on at 4 in the morning, with the eyes of someone who has been holding something too heavy for too long, you do not chase them. You do not corner them. You stand at the door, and you wait. You wait. And you keep the light on. So Maren kept the light on. She made stew on Monday. Sloane did not come. She made meatloaf on Tuesday. Sloane did not come. She made the chicken and dumplings her own mother had taught her in 1962 on Wednesday. Sloane did not come. And on Thursday afternoon, November 22nd, Thanksgiving Day, with a small turkey breast in the oven that she had bought for one, with the table set for 2 anyway, because she had set it for 2 every night that week, just in case. The rental car turned into the driveway. Maren saw it through the kitchen window. She did not move from the sink. She watched her daughter sit in the car for 11 minutes, watched her wipe her face twice, watched her finally get out, walk up the porch steps, stand on the porch in a wool coat that was not warm enough for Iowa in late November. Maren opened the door before Sloane knocked. Sloane said, I wasn't going to come, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. I drove past 4 times this week, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. How did you know? Maren said. The gravel sounds the same whether you turn in or not. Sloane looked at her. She said, Is that the turkey? Maren said. It is, Sloane said. I haven't had Thanksgiving in 3 years, Maren said. Neither have I. Sloane stepped into the kitchen, took off her coat, sat at the yellow formica table, put her hands flat on the surface, the way she had when she was 8 years old and trying to be brave. Maren brought her coffee. They did not say anything else for a long time. The day after Thanksgiving was Friday, November 23rd, day 10 of incubation. Sloane was still at the Pine Ridge Inn, but she came to the farm at 10 in the morning. She did not ask permission. She just came. She sat on a bale of hay in the barn while Maren did the noon turn. She watched her mother lift each egg, rotate it precisely, set it back, tilted point down. She said, "How do you remember which ones you've turned?" Maren said, "The pencil dots. I rotate them so the dot moves." Sloane said, "That's clever," Maren said. "That's the 4-H manual." Sloane was quiet. Then she said, "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Why didn't you call?" Maren said. "When?" Sloane said. "Ever. Any of the times. In the last 3 years." Maren stopped with her hand above an egg. She said, "Because I didn't know what to say," Sloane said. "You could have said anything," Maren said. "I could have said the wrong thing," Sloane said. "The wrong thing would have been better than nothing." Maren set the egg down. She straightened up, slowly, because her back. She turned to her daughter. She said, "Sloane, I have spent 38 years saying the wrong thing to people in the worst moments of their lives. I have told mothers their children were dead. I have told husbands their wives were not coming home. I have said it badly. I have said it gently. I have said it in every way it can be said. And not once, in 38 years. Did it ever matter how I said it?" Sloane looked at her. Maren said, "With you, it mattered." Sloane's eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. She said, "So you said nothing?" Maren said. "I said nothing," Sloane said. "That was worse," Maren said. "I know that now." The silence in the barn was very long. Outside, the wind moved through the cedars on the east fence line. The heat lamp hummed, Sloane said. "I have to go," Maren said. "All right." Sloane stood up, brushed straw off her jeans, walked toward the barn door. She stopped halfway. She said, without turning around. She said, "Mom, I'm going to candle one of these eggs with you on day 14. Maren said. "All right." Sloane walked out. Maren stood in the barn. She put her hand over her mouth. She did not let herself cry. But something in her chest moved again. The same place it had moved on Saturday when Sloane had said, "I'll text you my flight." Something thawing, after 38 years of holding very still. Day 14 was Tuesday, November 27th. Sloane came at 5 in the evening, wearing jeans and one of her father's old flannel shirts she had taken from the upstairs closet without asking. Maren saw it, did not comment. The barn was dark except for the heat lamp. Maren had the candler ready, the little LED candler she had bought at the farm supply on day 5. $11. She held it up. She said, "You ready?" Sloane said, "Show me what I'm looking for." Maren said, "Air cell at the large end. Network of vessels. Like a spider web. If you see a dark mass with branching red lines, the embryo is developing. If you see clear, or a dark ring with no vessels, the egg is not viable," Sloane said. "Okay." Maren picked up the first egg, held it against the candler. Sloane leaned in. Maren said, "There," Sloane said. "Oh my God, the spider web, the dark central mass, the clear air cell," Sloane said. "It's alive," Maren said. "It is." They went through all 56 eggs. Sloane held the candler for the last 20, her hands steadier than they had been in 2 months. Her face, in the LED glow, younger than it had been in the kitchen on Thanksgiving. 39 eggs showed clear development. 17 did not. Sloane wrote the numbers in Maren's notebook, in her own handwriting, which Maren had not seen in 3 years. The looping S, the crossed sevens her father had taught her in 3rd grade. Sloane said, "Mom." Maren said, "Yes." Sloane said, 39 is a lot," Maren said. 39 is a lot. Sloane closed the notebook. She said, "I'm staying at the Pine Ridge another week," Maren said. "All right," Sloane said. I'm not ready to go back yet." Maren did not ask back to where. She said, "The room across the hall is made up. Whenever you want it." Sloane did not say yes. She did not say no. She walked back to the rental car. She drove back to the Pine Ridge Inn. And that night, Maren turned off the kitchen light at 9 p.m., went up the stairs, walked past the closed door of the room across the hall, stopped, opened it, made sure the bed was still made, the way she had made it on Saturday, and remade it on Sunday, and remade it on Monday, and remade it every day since. She closed the door, she went to her own room, knelt by the bed. She said, "Lord, she is not gone yet. Thank you for that. Amen." Cormac Yates showed up on Friday morning, November 30th, day 17. Maren saw him from the kitchen window. The big silver F250. The Yates Poultry logo on the door. He parked at the far end of the driveway. Sat in the truck for a minute. Then got out, walked toward the porch with his hat in his hand. She opened the door. She said, "Cormac," he said. "Maren." She said, "Coffee." He said, "Yes." He sat at the yellow formica table. The same table he had sat at in 1972 when he had come for Sunday dinner and asked Maren's father for permission to court her. He looked smaller now, older. The man Maren remembered as a 6-foot wall of high school football had shrunk into himself in the years since Adele. She poured the coffee. She did not sit down. She stood at the counter. She said, "You called my daughter." Cormac put down his cup. He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "I thought I was helping." She said, "Helping who?" He said, "You," she said. "By telling my daughter I was losing my mind." He said, "By telling your daughter you needed her." She looked at him. For a long moment. Long enough that he had to look down at the coffee. She said, "Cormac, I have known you since we were 5 years old. I have known you long enough to know when you are telling me a partial truth." He said, "Maren." She said, "What is the rest of it?" He was quiet. She said, "Cormac, what is the rest of it?" He put both hands around the coffee cup. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a 64-year-old man who had spent his life working with chickens. Scarred and thick and shaking very slightly. He said, "Adele is at Cedar Manor." Maren said, "I heard." He said, "Memory Care. The full unit. She doesn't know me most days now." Maren did not say anything. He said, "It's $9,400 a month." Maren said, "Oh," he said, "the insurance covers some. The savings cover some. The farm covers some. But there's a gap. And the gap is going to take her out of Cedar Manor in 8 months if I don't close it." He looked up. He said, "I came to ask if you'd sell me the 40 acres on your south boundary, the bottom field, adjacent to my number 3 barn. I would pay you, above market, cash. I have a buyer who would. Who would float the cash if I sign a contract today?" Maren said. "Cormac." He said, "Maren, I know what I'm asking." She said, "I don't think you do." He said, "I do," she said. "That field is the field where my father is buried." Cormac closed his eyes. He said, "I know," Maren said. "He's buried under the bur oak in the south corner. Halden is buried next to him." "My plot is the 3rd spot," Cormac said. "I know," she said. "You want me to sell my burial plot?" He said, "Maren, I want you to save Adele." The silence in the kitchen was the silence of a thing being asked that should not be asked. Maren stood at the counter. She felt every one of her 68 years. She said, "Cormac," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am sorry about Adele. I have prayed for her. Every night. Since I heard. I will pray for her every night that I am alive," he said. "But," she said. "But I am not selling that field," he said. "Maren," she said. "I am sorry." He stood up. He looked at her. The look on his face was not anger. It was the look of a man who had walked into the only door he had left and found it locked. He said, "Then I will lose her," Maren said. "Cormac," he said. "I have to find the money somewhere," Maren said. "Cormac. There are church funds. There are county programs. There are Veterans Affairs benefits if. There is Medicaid spend down. There are options. I have spent 38 years walking families through these options. Let me help you. Cormac was already walking to the door. He said, I appreciate it, she said. Cormac, he said, I have to go. He walked out. She heard the truck start, heard it pull away. She stood in the kitchen. She said, out loud, to the empty room. She said, Halden, I just made a friend's situation worse to protect a piece of ground. She said, tell me I did the right thing. The kitchen did not answer. Sloane came that afternoon. She came every afternoon now, sat in the barn, watched the noon turn, helped Maren refill the humidity pans, wrote in the notebook, asked questions about incubation she could have looked up on her phone, but asked Maren instead. Maren told her about Cormac. She did not tell her everything. She did not tell her about 1972 or the proposal Cormac had made on the front porch of this farmhouse 46 years ago. She told her only about Adele and Cedar Manor and the offer for the South Field. Sloane was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Mom, Maren said. Yes, Sloane said. I could help him, Maren said. How? Sloane said. I'm a lawyer. I know how Medicaid spend down works. I know how veterans' benefits stack with long-term care. I could help him structure it, Maren said. You're a corporate lawyer, Sloane said. I was a corporate lawyer. Maren stopped. She did not turn her head. She kept her hands on the egg she was holding. She said, was. Sloane said. I was laid off in September. Maren turned. Slowly. She set the egg down. She said, Sloane. Sloane said, Pierce left me in October. He's with a yoga instructor named Brielle. Maren said, Sloane. Sloane said, I have not had a paycheck since September 4th. I have been pretending. I have been wearing my work clothes around the loft and applying for jobs and being rejected by every firm in the Mountain West. Maren said, Honey, Sloane said. Mom, don't. Maren said, Don't what? Sloane said, Don't call me honey. I cannot. If you call me honey, I'm going to come apart, Maren said. Honey. Sloane came apart. She sat down on the bale of hay. She put her hands over her face. She made the sound a person makes when they have been holding something for 10 weeks and finally let it down, which is not the sound of crying. It is the sound underneath crying, the sound of the room going out from under a person. Maren sat down next to her. She did not say anything. She put her hand on her daughter's back, the way she had put her hand on the backs of strangers for 38 years. But this was not a stranger. This was her child, Sloane said. Through her hands, Sloane said. I'm 35, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. I have no job. I have no husband. I have no children. I have an empty loft in Denver that I'm going to lose in 3 months, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. I lost the baby in April 2015, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. I called you, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. You didn't pick up, Maren said. I know, Sloane said. For 6 hours, Maren said. I know. The barn was very quiet, Maren said. Sloane. I was in the trauma bay on a school bus. Sloane said. You said. In your text. Later, Maren said. There were 14 children. Lynn County. The bus went off Highway 218, Sloane said. Mom, I know, Maren said. There was a little girl, 8 years old. Her name was Emily Halverson. Her left lung was collapsed. We worked on her for 2 hours. Sloane lifted her head. Maren was not looking at her. Maren was looking at the brooder, where the eggs sat under the orange light, where 39 of them were trying. Maren said. We saved her, Sloane said. Mom, Maren said. We saved Emily Halverson. And while we were saving her, the phone in my locker was ringing, and ringing and ringing, and I did not answer. Maren turned to her daughter. Maren said, and by the time I called you back, your baby was gone. And I sat in the locker room at St. Bernard's, and I held the phone, and I tried to think of what to say. And I could not think of one true thing, because both things were true. The little girl had lived, and my grandchild had died. And I had been the reason for one and not the other. and there was no language for that. So I did not call. I sent flowers. Because flowers do not have words. And I have been ashamed of those flowers for 3 years and 7 months. Sloane was staring at her. She said, "Mom," Maren said. "I should have called," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "I should have flown to Denver. I should have sat on your couch. I should have held you. I should have said. I should have said. Sloane, I'm so sorry. I should have said it badly. I should have said it anyway. I should have said it instead of nothing," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "I am saying it now. I am so sorry. I was not there. I should have been there. I am sorry." Sloane folded into her mother in the barn on a Friday afternoon in late November 2018. The way she had folded into her mother at age 4 after a nightmare. The way she had folded into her mother at 12 after the boys at school had laughed at her glasses. The way she had not folded into her mother in 23 years. Maren held her. Maren did not cry. Maren had not cried in 5 years. But she held her daughter. And she said, "I love you. I love you. I have loved you every single day for 3 years and 2 months and 25 days that I did not call. I love you." The wind moved through the cedars outside. The heat lamp hummed. The 39 eggs sat in the straw, each one still trying. The storm came on Saturday night, December 1st, day 18. The forecast had said snow. The forecast had not said the kind of snow that came. It came down through Iowa starting at 2 in the afternoon. By 4 it was sticking. By 6 it was 8 inches deep on the porch. By 8 the wind was 40 miles an hour and the visibility was 100 feet. At 9:13 p.m. the power went out. Maren had been expecting it. The Holloway place was at the end of the rural line. The power always went last and came back first, never. She had the generator gassed up in the barn. The kerosene heater filled. The candles laid out on the kitchen counter. But the generator did not start. She pulled the cord. The cord pulled smoothly. No engagement. She pulled it again. Again. A third time. The generator did not start. She stood in the barn in the dark with the snow blowing through the open door. And she looked at the brooder, where the heat lamp had gone out, where the temperature was already dropping, where 39 eggs sat in cooling straw. She said, out loud, to Halden, to God. She said, "Help me." She walked to the house, fast, not running, because her hip, but fast. She got every wool blanket she owned, the quilt from the foot of her bed, the Afghan from the couch, the flannel-lined work coat. She loaded them into a milk crate. She went back to the barn. She lifted the eggs, one by one, into the milk crate. She wrapped them in the layers of wool. She carried the crate to the house through 8 inches of snow with the wind coming sideways across the yard. She set the crate on the hearth. She started a fire in the wood stove. She knelt on the rag rug. She said, "Lord, I cannot lose them. I cannot. I cannot." The fire caught. She fed it. Slowly, she had heated the house with wood for 3 winters. She knew how. She built the heat up carefully, so that it would warm the eggs gradually, not shock them. She got the thermometer from her medical bag, the good one, from her years at St. Bernard's. She set it in the straw at the bottom of the milk crate. 68 degrees. Far too cold. She added another quilt over the top. She knelt on the hearth, and she waited. The temperature came up. 70, 73, 78. She held her hand inside the milk crate, between the eggs, like a hen. She did not move. 81, 85. She heard the wind outside. She heard the house creak. She heard her own breath. And then she heard a knock at the door. She thought she had imagined it. It came again. A pounding. Frantic. She got up, stiff. She went to the door. She opened it. Sloane stood on the porch. Snow caked to her hair, her coat, her boots. Her face was bloodless. Her eyelashes had ice on them. Maren stared at her. Sloane said, "The road is closed," Maren said. "How?" Sloane said. "I walked," Maren said. "From the Pine Ridge?" Sloane said. "Yes," Maren said. "That is 3 miles," Sloane said. "I know," Maren said, "in a blizzard." Sloane said. The power went out at the inn. I thought. About the eggs, I knew you would. I knew you would go out to the barn. I thought. I thought you might fall. Maren pulled her daughter into the house. She closed the door against the wind. She did not say anything. She unwrapped Sloane from her coat, from her gloves, from her hat. She sat her on the rag rug by the wood stove, next to the milk crate. Sloane looked at the milk crate. She said, "Oh God," Maren said. "They were going to freeze," Sloane said. "How many?" Maren said. 39, so far." Sloane reached out her hand, slowly, set it inside the crate, between two eggs, the way Maren had. She said, "They're alive," Maren said. "They are," Sloane said. "Mom, we have to keep them this way until morning," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "Together," Maren said. "Together." They sat on the rag rug. The fire crackled. The wind moaned around the house. Two women, a mother and a daughter, with their hands inside a milk crate of cracked silky eggs, keeping them alive, by body heat, by firelight, by presence, the kind of presence neither of them had given the other in 23 years. At 2 in the morning, Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Tell me about Emily Halverson," Maren said. "The 8-year-old." Sloane said. "Tell me about her." Maren told her. She told her about the bus that had gone off the road in the fog. She told her about the 14 children. She told her about Emily, who had been the smallest. She told her about the chest tube she had threaded with her own hands. She told her about Emily, who had stabilized at 6 p.m. and was airlifted to the Children's Hospital in Iowa City at 7, and had walked out 3 weeks later with a slight limp and a teddy bear. She told her about the locker room. She told her about the phone. She told her about the calls she had not answered. She told her about sitting alone in the locker room with her scrubs still on, and the blood of 14 children on her sneakers, and the knowledge in her chest that she had been the hand of God for someone else's daughter, and she had not been the hand of God for her own. She said, "Sloane, I do not regret saving Emily." She said, "I regret not being able to do both." Sloane said, "Mom, nobody can do both," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "I know it too. Now." The fire crackled. "The eggs we're holding," Sloane said. "I named her." Maren said. "Named who?" Sloane said. "The baby," Maren said. "Oh," Sloane said. "Her name was June," Maren said. "June," Sloane said, "because Halden's middle name was June. It was June." "I wanted to," Maren said. "I remember," Sloane said. "I named her after him," Maren said. "I did not know that," Sloane said. "I did not tell you," Maren said. "Sloane," Sloane said. "I have a granddaughter." She caught herself. She said, I had a daughter," Maren said. "June," Sloane said. "June." The fire crackled. Maren said, "Then I had a granddaughter," Sloane said. "You did," Maren said. "June Holloway," Sloane said. "June Holloway." They said the name into the warm air of the kitchen. The way you say a name that has not been said out loud. The way you say a name when you finally let it exist, Maren said. "Sloane." Sloane said. "Yes," Maren said. "June was my mother's middle name, too." Sloane said. "I know," Maren said. "Did you know?" Sloane said. "Dad told me. The day I told you I was pregnant. He called me after we hung up. He said, 'Your great-grandmother's middle name was June,' I thought. I thought it was a sign," Maren said. "It was a sign," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "June Holloway. We say her name together from now on. We say it, we do not forget her." "She was real," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Say it," Sloane said. "June Holloway," Maren said. "June Holloway." Sloane said. "June," Maren said. "June." The wind kept moaning. The fire kept burning. The eggs kept holding. The mother and daughter sat on the rag rug, hands inside a milk crate, saying a name that had not been said in 3 years and 7 months, until they fell asleep. Sometime around 4 in the morning, both of them, with their hands still resting between the eggs. The power came back at 9 in the morning. Maren woke first. The fire had burned low. The eggs were holding. She checked the thermometer. 91 degrees. Cooler than ideal. But not dangerous. The eggs were resilient if they cooled slowly. She got the heat lamp back on a 100-foot extension cord and aimed at the milk crate. She got the lamp temperature up. She got the humidity going again with a pan of water. By noon, the eggs were back in the barn, back in the brooder, at 99.5. The way they had been. 8 eggs had not made it. 8 out of 39. 31 remained. Maren and Sloane sat in the barn. They did not say anything for a long time. Then Sloane said, "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "I am not going back to Denver," Maren said. "All right," Sloane said. "I am not. I am not okay yet. But I am better than I was last week," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "I want to stay. For a while." "Just for a while," Maren said. "The room across the hall is made up," Sloane said. "I know," Maren said. "It has been made up since Saturday," Sloane said. "I know," she said. "Mom." "I have to go get my things from the Pine Ridge," Maren said. "I'll drive you," Sloane said. "The roads are still bad," Maren said. "The truck is 42 years old. It will go through anything," Sloane said. "All right," Maren stood up. She put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. She said, "Sloane." Sloane said. "Yes," Maren said. "I have to do something first," Sloane said. "What?" Maren said. "I have to make a phone call." She went into the house. She got the church directory off the shelf. She found the number she was looking for. She called Cormac Yates. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was tired. He said, "Maren." She said, "Cormac, I want you to listen to me." He said, "All right." She said, "I am not selling you the South Field." He said, "Maren." She said, "But." He said, "Yes." She said, "My daughter is here. She is a lawyer. She knows long-term care financing, Medicaid spend down, veterans benefits. She is going to help you. We are going to help you. Adele is going to stay at Cedar Manor." Cormac was silent. He said, "Maren." She said, "Cormac, I am not selling you my burial plot, but I am giving you my daughter." He said, "I do not know what to say." She said, "Say you will come over on Monday." He said, "I will come over on Monday." She said, "Bring Adele's paperwork." He said, "I will." She said, "Cormac." He said, "Yes." She said, "We do not throw people away." He said, "No." She said, "We checked twice." He said, "We checked twice." She hung up the phone. She stood in the kitchen. She looked out the window. Outside the barn, Sloane was walking toward the chicken coop in Halden's old flannel and a borrowed pair of work boots. The chickens were coming out into the snow-covered yard. The first ones tentative, then more. Sloane crouched down, held out her hand. One of the hens came up, pecked at her glove. Maren watched. She said, "To the empty kitchen." She said, "Halden," she said, "our daughter is home." The eggs began to pip on Tuesday morning, December 4th, day 21. Maren and Sloane were in the barn at 5:45 a.m. because Maren had heard it through the baby monitor she had set up in the brooder. A tapping. Very small. Very dry. The sound of a beak from the inside of a shell. Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "Is that?" Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Oh my God." They sat on the bale of hay together. They watched. The first pip appeared on a pale blue-cream shell at 6:11 a.m., a hole the size of a pencil point, then a ring of cracks around it. The beginning of the zip. By noon there were 4 pips. By 3 p.m. there were 9. By 6 p.m. the first chick was out. Wet, exhausted, lying on its side in the straw. Its sides heaving. Sloane was crying. Maren was not. But her hands were shaking, which was almost the same thing. By midnight on Tuesday there were 6 chicks. By noon on Wednesday there were 14. By Thursday evening there were 22. 22 small silky chicks. Buff and white and gray, fluffy, unsteady on their feet, beginning to peep at each other and at the world. Sloane stood at the brooder. She said, "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "From 247, Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "From a dumpster," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane wrote in the notebook. In her own handwriting, December 6, 2018, 22 chicks hatched, 9 eggs did not make it through PIP stage, 22 alive, 22 healthy, 22. She closed the notebook. She said, "Mom, I'm not going back to Denver," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "I'm going to open a small practice here. Help old people, help families. Help people whose situations are complicated," Maren said. "All right," Sloane said. "I called Pierce yesterday," Maren said. "And," Sloane said, "I told him to send the paperwork," Maren said. "Good," Sloane said. "I told him not to call again," Maren said. "Good," Sloane said. I think I'm going to be all right," Maren said. "I know you are," Sloane said. "How do you know?" Maren said. "Because," Sloane said. "Because what?" Maren said. "Because I checked," Sloane said. "Checked what?" Maren said. "You." She put her hand on her daughter's face. She said, "One of them was still trying," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said, "one of them is still here." The wind was quiet that night. The barn was warm. The brooder glowed orange. 22 chicks slept in the straw under the heat lamp, and in the farmhouse kitchen, at the yellow formica table. A mother and a daughter sat across from each other, eating stew, for the first time in 3 years, together. December in Millbrook was the kind of month where the sky stayed gray for 19 days in a row, where the cedars on the east fence line carried snow on their branches like old women carrying laundry, where the wood stove went day and night. Sloane Holloway moved into the room across the hall on Saturday, December 8, 2018. She did not bring much: a suitcase, a garment bag, a box of books she had shipped from Denver, 3 pairs of boots that were not warm enough for Iowa, 1 framed photograph from her wedding that she put face down in the bottom drawer of the dresser, and 1 small velvet pouch. She did not show Maren what was in the pouch. Not at first. Cormac Yates came over on Monday, December 10th, with Adele's paperwork, 2 banker's boxes, insurance policies from 1981 onward, tax returns, Medicare statements, Cedar Manor invoices, the deed to Yates Poultry, the marriage certificate from 1975. Sloane sat at the yellow formica table. She opened the first box. She did not speak for 40 minutes. Cormac sat across from her, hands around a coffee cup, looking smaller than he had a week ago, the skin under his eyes the color of wood ash. Maren stood at the counter, slicing apples for a pie, listening. Sloane finally looked up. She said, "Mr. Yates," Cormac said. "Cormac," Sloane said. "Cormac, you have been overpaying for 9 months," Cormac said. "What?" Sloane said. "You have been paying Cedar Manor the full private rate. You qualify for partial veterans benefits because Adele was a teacher in a federally funded Head Start program from 1979 to 1984. That stacks. You did not file the paperwork. Nobody told you to file the paperwork," Cormac said. Sloane said. "Also, you have not done a Medicaid spend-down analysis, which you should have done in March, which would have protected the farm," Cormac said. "I did not know," Sloane said. "I know you did not know. Nobody told you, because the people who tell you these things charge $500 an hour to tell you," Cormac said. "And you," Sloane said. "I charge $0 an hour." Cormac stared at her. Sloane said, "Cormac, you are not going to lose Adele. You are not going to lose the farm. You are not going to sell the South Field. You are going to file 3 forms by Friday, and in 90 days you are going to be solvent." Cormac put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, the shoulders of a 64-year-old man who had been carrying a thing alone for 14 months, who had been walking through every door he could find, who had been told by every advisor he could afford that he had to liquidate. Maren put down the paring knife. She walked to the table. She put her hand on Cormac's shoulder. She said, "Cormac," he said. through his hands. He said, "Maren, I am sorry I called your daughter," she said. "Cormac, I'm glad you called my daughter." He looked up. His face was wet. He said, "I am glad too." He laughed. Once. The cracked laugh of a man who has not laughed in a while. He said, "I came here to take your land," Maren said. "And instead my daughter is going to save your wife," Cormac said. Maren said. "We checked twice," Cormac said. "We checked twice." He drove home in the December dusk, in the kitchen. Sloane closed the first banker's box. She looked at her mother. She said, "Mom?" Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "I think I just found my practice," Maren said. "I think you did." The news got out the way news gets out in a town of 2,400 people. Slowly at first, then all at once. By the second week of December, the story of Maren Holloway had shifted. She was no longer the woman who climbed into dumpsters. She was the woman who had hatched 22 chicks out of 247 cracked eggs, and whose daughter, the Denver lawyer, was helping Cormac Yates keep his wife in memory care. The story had wings. It went to Daisy's diner. It went to the feed store. It went to the post office. It went to the Casey's gas station. It went to the First Methodist Church choir practice on Wednesday nights. By December 18th, a reporter from the Millbrook Gazette had called. Wanted to do a piece. Wilma Pickett, the librarian, heard about the call, walked over to the farm that afternoon with a thermos of coffee. Wilma sat at the yellow formica table. She said, "Maren," Maren said. "Wilma," Wilma said. "I want to write it," Maren said. "Write what?" Wilma said. "The story," Maren said. "I am not a story," Wilma said. "Maren, you are a story," Maren said. "I do not want my picture in the paper," Wilma said. "Then I will not put your picture in the paper," Maren said. "I do not want the town to make this into a thing," Wilma said. "The town has already made this into a thing." Maren was quiet. Wilma said, "Maren, let me write it the way it actually happened. Let me write the truth, before someone else writes it the wrong way," Maren said. "Why?" Wilma said. "Because the truth deserves a defender." Maren looked at her old friend, the 71-year-old librarian in the plaid wool cardigan, the woman who had been alone for 4 years, the woman who had brought her 3 books on a November morning and had not laughed at her once. Maren said, "All right," Wilma said. "All right." The article ran on December 22nd, the Saturday before Christmas, page 1 of the Millbrook Gazette. The headline was, "The Woman Who Saved 22 Lives from the Trash." No photograph of Maren. A photograph of the brooder. 22 small silky chicks, buff and white and gray, crowded around a water dish. The article was 1,200 words. It told the story straight. The dumpster, the first egg, the 71 retrieved, the 56 that went into the brooder, the 39 at day 7, the 31 after the blizzard, the 22 chicks alive. It quoted Maren only once. The quote was, "Cracked does not always mean finished." I needed to check. The article went online on Saturday afternoon. By Saturday night, it had been shared 1,100 times on Facebook. By Sunday morning, it had been picked up by the Des Moines Register. By Sunday evening, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Monday morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Maren Holloway's name was on local news segments in Chicago, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Kansas City. She did not know. She did not have cable. She did not check Facebook. She made Christmas Eve dinner the way she had always made it. Ham, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, maple glazed carrots, cranberry sauce from a can, apple pie. She set the table for 2. Sloane came down the stairs at 5:30 p.m. in a sweater Maren had not seen since 2009. The red cable knit Halden had given her for Christmas the year she turned 26. Maren stopped in the doorway. She said, "Sloane." Sloane said, "I found it in the closet upstairs." Maren said, "He bought you that," Sloane said. "I know," Maren said. "You said it was scratchy," Sloane said. "It is. It is so scratchy. I do not know how I am going to wear it through dinner." Maren laughed. It was the first time Maren had laughed in 5 years. She did not notice, but Sloane noticed. Sloane noticed everything now. The phone rang at 6:48 p.m. Maren picked up, half expecting Cormac. He had called twice that week with paperwork questions. A voice she did not know said, "Is this Maren Holloway?" Maren said. "Yes," the voice said. "My name is Anneliese Vogt. I am calling from Cedar Rapids." Maren said. "Yes," Anneliese Vogt said. "I read the article in the Register this morning." Maren said. "Oh," Anneliese Vogt said. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry to call on Christmas Eve." Maren said. "It is all right," Anneliese said. "I have been trying to find you for a long time. I did not know how. I did not know your last name. I only knew you worked at St. Bernard's," Maren said. "I worked at St. Bernard's," Anneliese said. "June of 1998. Maren stopped. Sloane was setting the table behind her. She paused, looking at her mother's back. Anneliese said, "My mother, Ingrid Vogt, was in a car accident on Interstate 80 outside Newton on June 11th, 1998. Maren held the phone. She said, I do not specifically remember," Anneliese said. "The doctors told my father she was gone. They had stopped working on her. There was a nurse, a woman in her 40s. The nurse said to the doctors, 'Try again, one more time.'" Maren said. "Oh." Anneliese said, "My mother lived for 17 more years. She died in 2015 of ovarian cancer. She was 68 when she died." Maren said. "Oh." Anneliese said, "I was 23 when she had the accident. I am 43 now. I have a son. He is 11 years old. His name is Soren. He has lived his entire life because my mother lived. Because someone said, 'Try again.'" Maren did not speak. Anneliese said, "Mrs. Holloway, I read your article. The phrase you used, 'cracked,' does not always mean finished. I needed to check. My mother kept a journal. She started it the week after the accident. The first entry says, 'The nurse said try again, so I am trying.'" Maren sat down at the yellow formica table. She put her free hand flat on the surface. Anneliese said, "Mrs. Holloway, I have wanted to thank you for 20 years. I did not know who to thank," Maren said. Anneliese said, "May I drive out and meet you? After the holidays. May I bring my son?" Maren said. Anneliese said, "Yes." Maren said, "Yes." Anneliese said, "Thank you." Maren said, Anneliese said, "Yes." Maren said, "I do not remember your mother." Anneliese said, "I know." Maren said, "I am sorry." Anneliese said, "Mrs. Holloway, you do not need to remember her. She remembered you. That is what mattered." Maren put the phone down. Slowly, Sloane was standing by the table. She said, "Mom." Maren said, "Sloane." Sloane said, "Who is that?" Maren said, "Sit down." Sloane sat. Maren told her. Sloane did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Mom." Maren said, "Yes." Sloane said, "June." Maren said, "June." Sloane said, "You saved a woman in June of 1998, and her name was Ingrid. And the woman who is calling you tonight is named Anneliese, and Anneliese is calling on Christmas Eve to tell you that her son exists because of what you said in a trauma bay 20 years ago." Maren said, "Yes," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "I want to show you something." She got up. She went upstairs. She came back down with the velvet pouch. She sat at the table. She opened the pouch. She took out a small silver bracelet, sized for an infant, with the name engraved. "June Holloway," Sloane said. "The hospital gave it to me." "After," she said. "After," she said. "I have carried it in my purse for 3.5 years," Maren said. Sloane said, "I want to put it in the kitchen, on the windowsill, where the light comes through. I want her name to be in this house," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Is that all right?" Maren said. "Yes." Sloane stood up, walked to the kitchen window. the window above the sink, where Maren had stood at 5 o'clock that morning 6 weeks earlier, looking at the gray pre-dawn before she went to find produce crates. Sloane set the small silver bracelet on the sill. In the light of the kitchen lamp, it looked like it had been there a long time, like it belonged. Maren came up behind her daughter, put her arms around her, the way she had not done in 25 years. She said, "June," Sloane said, "June." They stood at the window, the Christmas Eve dinner cooling on the table. Two women, a grandmother and a mother, saying the name of a girl who had existed for 28 weeks and was real and would be remembered. The backlash came in the new year, because there is always a backlash, because that is the price of being seen. On January 8, 2019, a woman in Cedar Rapids named Patrice Ardmore posted a long status on the Eastern Iowa Community Forum on Facebook. The post had 3 photographs, one of the Millbrook Gazette article, one of a dumpster behind a grocery store in Cedar Rapids, one of a generic photograph of a chicken farm. The post said, "Be aware, a woman in Millbrook is selling eggs from chickens hatched out of garbage. This is unsafe. This is unsanitary. This is the kind of irresponsible food production that puts our families at risk. Local health authorities should investigate, refuse to buy, share to warn others." The post was shared 400 times in 12 hours. By January 9th, Maren had been called 3 times by people canceling standing egg orders. By January 10th, the Henderson Farm Market had received 7 complaints. By January 11th, the county health inspector, a woman named Renee Pollard, drove out to the Holloway place. She arrived at 11 a.m. She was 44, practical, carrying a clipboard. Maren met her at the door. Renee said, "Mrs. Holloway," Maren said. "Yes," Renee said. "I have to inspect the operation. I have received formal complaints." "I have to," Maren said. "Come in," Renee said. "I am sorry," Maren said. "Do not be sorry. You are doing your job." She took Renee through the barn, the brooder, the hen house, the water system, the feed storage, the egg cleaning station, the record book where Maren had logged every egg laid since October 2015. Renee inspected for 2 hours. She tested water samples, took photos of the facilities, photographed the records. At the end, she sat at the yellow Formica table. She said, "Mrs. Holloway." Maren said, "Yes," Renee said. "Your operation is cleaner than any farm I have inspected in 2 years," Maren said. "Oh," Renee said. "The chicks from the cracked eggs. Are they laying yet?" Maren said. "3 of them started laying last week," Renee said. "May I see the eggs?" Maren brought her 3 eggs. From the laying boxes in the smaller secondary pen Maren had built for the silky hens that had started early. Renee held one up to the light. She said, "These are the cleanest eggs I have ever seen," Maren said. "Thank you," Renee said. "Mrs. Holloway," Maren said. "Yes," Renee said. "I am going to file my report. I am going to recommend no action. I am going to note the Facebook post as unsubstantiated," Maren said. "Thank you," Renee said. "May I take some eggs home?" Maren said. "Yes." Renee paid full price for a dozen. She would not let Maren refuse. She drove away. Maren stood on the porch. She watched the inspector's car go down the gravel drive. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired. She felt the cost of being seen. She felt the cost of having lived a quiet life for 68 years and now suddenly being a person other people had opinions about. She went inside. She sat at the yellow Formica table. She put her head in her hands. And for the first time since Halden died in March 2013, she cried. She cried for 10 minutes. Quiet, shoulders shaking, 5.5 years of withheld water coming out of her. Sloane found her there, came in from town, set down her bag, did not say anything, sat in the chair next to her mother, put her hand on her mother's back, and waited, the way a person waits at a bedside, the way Maren had waited at 10,000 bedsides, until her mother was done. Mom said. After a while, Maren said, "I am sorry," Sloane said. "Do not be sorry," Maren said. "I have not done that in a long time," Sloane said. I know, Maren said. I think I needed to. Sloane said, I know. She got up. She made tea. She brought 2 cups back to the table. She sat down. She said, Mom, Maren said. Yes, Sloane said. I have an idea, Maren said. What? Sloane said. About Patrice Ardmore, Maren said. Sloane, do not do anything legal, Sloane said. I am not going to do anything legal, Maren said. What are you going to do? Sloane said. I am going to ask Wilma Pickett to call a town meeting, Maren said. Sloane said. Mom, the town wants to defend you. They have been waiting for an opportunity. Let them, Maren said. I do not want to ask people to defend me, Sloane said. You do not have to ask. They are going to. Wilma Pickett called the meeting for Wednesday, January 16th, at the First Methodist Church Social Hall, after choir practice, 7 p.m. She did not announce it as a defense of Maren. She announced it as a community discussion of local agriculture and the changing landscape of food production in Lynn and Black Hawk counties. People understood. 62 people showed up, in a church social hall built for 40. They brought folding chairs from the Sunday school rooms. They stood along the back wall. They sat on the radiator covers. They drank coffee from the church urn that had been brewing since 1987. Maren sat in the second row, with Sloane on one side and Wilma on the other. Pastor Eldon Reeves stood at the front, the pastor of First Methodist for 9 years, 57 years old. A man who wore the kind of glasses that suggested he had read more books than the rest of the room combined. He said, Friends, he said, we are here tonight to talk about food, and about neighbors, and about how a story moves through a community, and what it means when a story is true, and what it means when a story is not. He said, I am going to step aside and let people speak. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Cormac Yates stood up, the largest commercial poultry producer in the county, in a flannel shirt, with his cap in his hand. He said, My name is Cormac Yates. Most of you know me. I run the chicken operation south of town. I have known Maren Holloway since we were 5 years old. The room was very quiet. He said, 2 months ago, my wife Adele was about to be removed from Cedar Manor Memory Care because I could not afford the payments. I was going to lose her. He paused. He said, Maren Holloway and her daughter Sloane have spent the last 6 weeks going through every piece of paperwork in my filing cabinet, filing for benefits I did not know existed. They have not charged me $1. He paused. He said, My wife is staying at Cedar Manor. He said, Maren, stand up. Maren did not want to, but she stood up. Cormac said, To the room. He said, This woman has spent her life saving people. She does not stop. She does not stop for anyone. She did not stop for those eggs in the dumpster. She did not stop for my wife. She does not stop. He sat down. The room was still quiet. Then Wilma Pickett stood up. She said, My name is Wilma Pickett. I have been the librarian in this town for 38 years. I have known almost everyone in this room since you were children, she said. On November 14th, Maren Holloway came into my library and asked for books on hatching silky eggs. I did not laugh at her, because Maren Holloway has not asked me for anything in 38 years that was not serious. She said, I gave her the books, and she went home, and she did the work, and 22 chicks are alive because of that. She sat down. Ro Brennan stood up next. The market manager, he said, My wife was a nurse, Helen Brennan. Some of you knew her. She died of cancer in 2016. He said, Before she died, she told me, Ro, do not throw away anything that is still trying. I did not know what she meant. I thought it was the medication talking, he said. Then I heard about Maren and the eggs, and I understood, he said. I have been setting aside the cracked eggs at the market for Maren ever since. Quietly, without telling anyone, because I thought it was a private thing, he said. It is not a private thing. He sat down. A woman Maren did not know stood up, a woman in her 30s, with a small boy on her lap. She said, My name is Anneliese Vogt. I drove down from Cedar Rapids tonight. The room turned, she said. 20 years ago, this woman, Maren Holloway, saved my mother's life in a trauma bay in Des Moines. I have a son. His name is Soren. He is 11 years old. He exists because Maren told 2 doctors. Try again. She put her hand on Soren's shoulder. She said, Soren, stand up. Soren stood up, a thin 11-year-old boy with dark hair and his mother's eyes. He said, in a clear, small voice that he had clearly practiced. He said, Mrs. Holloway, you saved my grandma. I never met my grandma in person, but I have her journals, and I have her photographs, and I know her because my mom remembers her. Thank you for letting me know her. He sat back down. The room was silent. A woman in the back row stood up. Maren did not know her either. The woman said, my name is Teresa Belknap. I work at St. Bernard's Hospital. I have been an ICU nurse there for 26 years. Maren turned in her chair. Teresa said, Maren trained me in 1996. She trained 22 of us between 1995 and 2010. There are 43 nurses currently working at St. Bernard's. 16 of them were trained directly or indirectly by Maren Holloway. She said, Maren, the hospital has not been the same since you retired. She said, I drove 85 miles tonight because I wanted you to know that. She sat down, and then person after person stood up. A man whose daughter Maren had cared for after a car accident in 2003. A woman whose mother had died at the hospital under Maren's care in 2007. A teacher who had been in Maren's Bible study group. The mayor of Millbrook. For 30 minutes. People rose and spoke, and sat down. 30 minutes of being seen, of being defended, of being recognized for a life that had been lived quietly for 68 years. Maren sat in the second row, with Sloane on one side and Wilma on the other. She did not speak. She did not stand up. She held her daughter's hand. She kept very still, the way she had kept very still for 68 years. But this time the stillness was different. This time the stillness was the stillness of a person at the center of a love that had been waiting for an opportunity. The Patrice Ardmore Facebook post was taken down on January 17th. Patrice did not apologize, but Patrice took it down, which was a kind of apology. A man named Beckett Ainsworth called the farm on Friday, January 25th. He said, Mrs. Holloway, Maren said. Yes, he said. My name is Beckett Ainsworth. I am the executive chef at Verdant, the restaurant in Des Moines. Maren said. I have heard of it, Beckett said. I read the Gazette article in December, and then the Associated Press piece. And then I sent a friend of mine to Cedar Manor to ask Adele Yates's husband about you, because I do not trust journalism, Maren said. All right, Beckett said. Mrs. Holloway, I would like to buy 8 dozen of your silky eggs a week. At $4.50 per egg, Maren said. That is too much, Beckett said. That is the going rate at restaurants in New York City, Maren said. We are not in New York City, Beckett said. I know, but my menu has a storyline, and your eggs have a storyline, and my customers will pay for the alignment, Maren said. I do not want to expand, Beckett said. I do not want you to expand. I want you to stay exactly the size you are. 8 dozen a week, same hens, same farm, same woman. I will pay for the story, Maren said. I need to think about it, Beckett said. Take your time. She talked to Sloane that night. Sloane said. Mom, take the deal, Maren said. I do not want this to become a thing, Sloane said. It is already a thing, Maren said. I do not want to be a chef's curiosity, Sloane said. You will not be. The eggs are the story. The story is true. He is buying the truth, Maren said. I do not know, Sloane said. Mom, the money would let you keep the farm without dipping into Dad's pension. The money would mean you do not have to make the choice between heating oil and the new water line in the barn next year, Maren said. I am okay on heating oil, Sloane said. Mom, Maren said. Yes, Sloane said. Take the deal. Maren took the deal. The first delivery to Verdant was on Wednesday, February 13th. 8 dozen pale blue cream silky eggs. In a wooden flat, wrapped in straw, driven to Des Moines by Sloane in the 1982 Ford F-150 because Maren did not feel like driving that day. Sloane returned at 3 p.m. with a check for $432. "And a story," she said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "The chef did not let me leave until I had eaten lunch in his kitchen," Maren said. "Oh," Sloane said. "He made me a silky egg. Soft poached. Over toast. He put one shaving of black truffle on it," Maren said. "Was it good?" Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. I cried. The spring came in late that year. Iowa always took its time in March. But by the first week of April, the cedars on the east fence had begun to push out new green, and the chickens had begun to range further from the coop. And the 22 silkies, now fully feathered, buff and white and gray with their distinctive black skin under the down, had begun to lay. Maren and Sloane stood at the pond Maren's grandfather had described as reliable, watching the 22 silkies, none of them water birds, none of them interested in the pond, pecking at the grass on the bank. Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "I am going to rent the office above the diner," Maren said. "Holloway Law," Sloane said. "Holloway Law," Maren said. "Helping old people in complicated families," Sloane said. "Helping old people in complicated families," Maren said. "I am proud of you," Sloane said. "I am proud of me too," Maren said. "That is the first time I have ever heard you say that," Sloane said. "It is the first time I have ever said it." The pond reflected the sky. A red-tailed hawk circled in the high blue. Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Cormac is coming for Easter dinner." "With Adele." "If she is well enough that day," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "Wilma is coming," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. "Pastor Reeves and his wife are coming," Maren said. "I know," Sloane said. Anneliese Vogt asked if she could bring Soren, Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "Are you going to be okay with that many people?" Maren said. "I am going to set the table for 9, Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "I love you," Maren said. "I love you too." They walked back to the house, in the kitchen, on the windowsill above the sink. The small silver bracelet caught the afternoon light. June Holloway. Easter Sunday was April 21, 2019. Maren was at the kitchen counter at 5:30 a.m., the ham in the oven, the bread rising on the back of the stove, the kitchen smelling of yeast and rosemary and warm sugar. She poured a cup of coffee. She walked outside. The sun had not come up yet. The cedars on the east fence were dark against the lightening sky. She walked to the chicken coop. She opened the gate. She walked to the laying boxes. In the third box on the left, a pale blue cream silky egg, just laid, still warm to the touch. She lifted it in her palm. She stood in the chicken coop, in the half-light of dawn, with one warm egg in her hand. The way she had stood in the dock light of the Henderson Farm Market on November 13, 2018, 5 months and 8 days ago, a lifetime ago. She held the egg. She felt the heat. She closed her eyes. She said, out loud, "To the dawn, to Halden, to June, to God." She said, "Thank you." She walked back to the house. Sloane was up, standing at the kitchen window, drinking coffee, wearing one of her father's flannel shirts under a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back. Maren said, "Sloane," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said, "I brought you something." She held out the egg. Sloane took it. She held it in her palm. She said, "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "It is warm," Maren said. "It is," Sloane said. "Are you going to put it in the carton?" Maren said. "No," Sloane said. "What are you going to do with it?" Maren said. "I am going to leave it on the windowsill, with the bracelet, until tonight, so that everyone who walks through this kitchen today can see it," Sloane said. "See what?" Maren said. "See that something we almost threw away came back and is now what feeds us," Sloane said. "Mom," Maren said. "Yes," Sloane said. "That is a sermon," Maren said. That is the truth. Sloane laughed. Maren laughed. In the kitchen, the mother and the daughter, setting an egg on a windowsill, next to a small silver bracelet. Both of them here, both real. By 2 p.m. the house was full. Cormac came with Adele, who did not know him most days, but who on this day held his hand, and smiled at Maren, and said, "You look familiar." And Maren said, "I am Maren." And Adele said, "Yes, Maren." That was all. But it was a great deal. Wilma came with 2 pies. Pastor Reeves and his wife Lydia came with a casserole. Anneliese came with Soren. And with her mother's journals, 3 leather-bound volumes from 1998 to 2015. She gave them to Maren. She said, "They are yours. They were always yours." Sloane carved the ham. Maren said grace. She said, "Lord." She said, "We thank you for this food. We thank you for this table. We thank you for these people." She stopped. She did not know what to say next. She had said grace at this table 1,000 times. The same words. The Methodist Book of Common Worship. The blessing she had learned at age 6. But this time the words were not enough. She said, "Lord." She said, "We thank you for the things you do not throw away." She said, "Amen." The room said, "Amen." The food went around. Soren sat next to Maren. He was 11. He kept looking at her. Sideways. With great seriousness. The way children look at people who have done impossible things. He said, "Mrs. Holloway?" Maren said, "Yes." Soren said, "Can I see the chickens?" Maren said, "After we eat." Soren said, "After we eat." Maren said, "Yes." Soren said, "Mrs. Holloway." Maren said, "Yes." Soren said, "Are any of them named?" Maren said, "No." Soren said, "Could I name one?" Maren said, "Yes." Soren said, "Could I name one Ingrid?" Maren said, "Yes." Soren said, "Could I name one June?" Maren stopped with the fork halfway to her mouth. She looked at Sloane. Sloane was looking back. Sloane said, "To Soren." Sloane said, "Soren. How did you know that name?" Soren said, "My mom told me." "In the car." She said, "There is a baby this family lost. Her name was June. I thought maybe if I named a chicken after her, she would." He stopped. He was 11. He could not finish. Maren said, "Soren." Soren said, "Yes." Maren said, "You can name 2 chickens, Ingrid and June." Soren said, "Yes." Sloane said, "Soren?" Soren said, "Yes." Sloane said, "Thank you." Soren said, "You are welcome." He went back to his ham. The table went quiet. Then Wilma said, "Maren." Maren said, "Yes." Wilma said, "Pass the rolls." Maren passed the rolls. The meal went on, a 9-person table on Easter Sunday 2019, in a farmhouse outside Millbrook, Iowa, where 5.5 years earlier, a widow had sat alone every night with the lights off by 9, after dinner, after pie, after Soren had been taken to see the chickens, and had solemnly named Ingrid and June, and had been allowed to hold one of them, the smallest, the runt, the chick that had hatched 9th in December, and was still smaller than the others, and was probably going to stay small. After Adele had been driven home by Cormac, after Wilma had left with her empty pie plates, after Pastor Reeves and Lydia had said goodbye at the porch, after Anneliese and Soren had driven east toward Cedar Rapids in the long blue light of the Iowa spring evening, Maren and Sloane sat on the porch. The sun was going down. The cedars on the east fence were dark again. The chickens were settling for the night. Maren had her notebook. She wrote, April 21st, 2019, Easter Sunday, 22 chicks, now 20 laying hens, 346 eggs produced since first lay in February. Verdant contract holding. Cormac's wife stable. Sloane's practice opens May 1st. Soren named Ingrid and June. She paused. She wrote, 247 cracked eggs in a dumpster. One of them was warm. I thought I saved the chickens. The chickens saved me. They brought my daughter home. They gave me friends at an age when I thought it was too late. They reminded me that God does not throw away anything still trying. And she paused. She wrote. And I. She paused. She wrote. At 68, with gray hair, with a heart that had been broken, with years that had been quiet, I am still here. She closed the notebook. She set it on the porch rail. Sloane reached over, took her mother's hand. Maren held it. The light on the cedars went orange. The light went red. The light went purple. A barn swallow cut across the yard. Maren closed her eyes. She listened to the chickens settling. She listened to the wind in the cedars. She listened to her daughter breathing next to her on the porch and in the kitchen. Behind them, on the windowsill above the sink, a pale blue cream silky egg sat next to a small silver bracelet. June Holloway, in the last of the April light. Both still here, both real.